Have you ever felt like your life could finally make sense if only someone would listen long enough to really see you? Like maybe you've spent years navigating anxiety, depression, executive dysfunction, sensory overwhelm, but no matter how hard you try to explain it, the response is always, that's not what autism or ADHD looks like, or it's probably just anxiety. Or worse, you're doing fine, you don't need a diagnosis. In today's world, more and more people are recognizing themselves in neurodivergent experiences, not because they've suddenly developed new traits, but because social media and online communities are finally giving language, context, and visibility to the kinds of struggles that have been misunderstood or dismissed for decades. But here's the problem. Even when people begin to suspect they might be autistic or ADHD, getting that formal diagnosis, one that could open doors to support, accommodations, and healing, isn't easy. In fact, for many people, it's nearly impossible. Formal diagnoses are still being gatekept, hidden behind financial barriers, long waitlists, ableist assumptions, and outdated diagnostic criteria that often fail to capture the lived experiences of neurodivergent people. And this is especially the case if you're not a white cis man showing textbook symptoms. So in today's video, we're going to explore what it really means to seek a diagnosis in the system. Who gets believed? Who gets dismissed? And how has the rise of neurodivergent spaces on social media changed the game? Is social media creating a wave of fake self-diagnoses, or is it giving people a lifeline the system refuses to offer? Let's talk about it. The current reality is that getting a diagnosis for autism or ADHD as an adult is hard. And for many, it's just not accessible. You might have to wait months or even years for an appointment with a qualified clinician. And if you want to bypass that wait and find someone who's neuro-informed and neuro-affirming, you're likely looking at hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars out of pocket. Many health systems don't cover comprehensive neuropsych evaluations, especially for adults. And even when they do, you're often stuck seeing providers who've received minimal training in adult neurodivergence, especially outside the stereotypical mold. It's still common to hear stories of people being told, you're too articulate, you make eye contact, you're not fidgeting, you have a job, so it must not be autism or ADHD. This is what I mean when I say diagnoses are kept behind a paywall. It's not just about money, it's about power. Who gets to decide what autism or ADHD looks like? Who gets believed? Too often, neurodivergence is missed because people's symptoms don't match the narrow, outdated lens used in clinical settings. Diagnostic criteria has long prioritized external traits apparently easier to spot in white cisgender boys, traits like hyperactivity, impulsivity, meltdowns, and social awkwardness. But what about internalized experiences? What about the adult who has spent their entire life masking? Maybe that person has learned to script conversations, force eye contact, suppress their stimming or fidgeting, or hyperanalyze every social interaction to the point of exhaustion. On the surface, they look like they're functioning, but underneath, they're burning out. And when they finally gather the courage to seek help, they're often misdiagnosed. Depression, anxiety, borderline personality disorder, anything but neurodivergence. This is called diagnostic overshadowing, and it's rampant. It happens when professionals pathologize surface-level symptoms without understanding what's underneath. And it disproportionately affects women, trans, and non-binary people, as well as people of color. Before people even get to the point of seeking a diagnosis, there's often a heavy emotional toll that's already been paid. Living undiagnosed can feel like walking through life in the dark, constantly bumping into things and blaming yourself for not seeing them coming. You try harder, you read all the productivity hacks, you work twice as long just to stay afloat. And you still feel like you're falling behind. And when you don't have the language of neurodivergence, those struggles don't feel like symptoms. They feel like personal failures. This is where internalized ableism creeps in. You begin to believe the voices that call you lazy, disorganized, antisocial, or dramatic. You start to think maybe you are too much. Maybe it's just you who is the problem. So by the time we reach out for help, we've often spent years, if not decades, dragging the weight of that shame behind us. That's why recognition, whether through a formal diagnosis or a moment of clarity online, can feel so profoundly healing. Now, here's where the conversation gets complicated, because in the face of all this gatekeeping, something remarkable has happened. The neurodivergent community said, if you won't listen to us in the clinic, we'll talk to each other online. Platforms like TikTok, Instagram, or Reddit have become places where people are finally putting language to their experiences. People are sharing memes, infographics, video essays like this, some humorous, some deeply vulnerable, about what it feels like to be autistic or ADHD in a neurotypical world. And for many, that's the first time they've ever seen themselves reflected. That's the first time they've thought, wait a second, this explains everything. It's what I call an egg crack moment, a term borrowed from the trans community. It's that flash of self-recognition that shatters everything you thought you knew about yourself and starts putting the real you back together. So how does someone go from seeing a meme to considering a diagnosis? Let's say you stumble upon a video that says, you might be ADHD if you constantly interrupt others. Or you might be autistic if you've always felt like you're playing a role in social settings. You think back, you remember how draining school was, not just the work, but the noise, the lights, the overwhelming social expectations. You remember being called too sensitive, too weird, too blunt, too intense, too distracted. You start connecting dots that no one else ever connected for you. So you research, you read, you watch. You begin comparing your experiences with those of others. And maybe, for the first time, things start to click. For many, finally receiving a diagnosis, whether formally or self-identified, isn't just informational, it's existential. It's the moment when your entire life story gets re-narrated. When past experiences you once blamed yourself for, social burnout, sensory overload, time blindness, meltdowns, are recontextualized as part of a neurotype, not a personal flaw. I've had clients say things like, it feels like I've been gaslighting myself for decades. That's what it's like to live without a diagnosis. You sense the friction, but the world tells you it's all in your head. And then someone gives you the words, autistic, ADHD, sensory seeking, rejection-sensitive dysphoria, and it's like being handed a map for the first time. Not a cure, not a fix, just a framework. One that allows you to finally rest, to breathe, to stop blaming yourself. Diagnosis isn't just about accessing services. It's about validation. It's about giving people permission to be who they've always been. This is where we hit another point of tension, because some people hear this and panic. But what if people are just self-diagnosing? What if they're getting it wrong? And listen, I get it. I really do. As a licensed clinical social worker who is also training to become a licensed psychologist, I believe in the value of professional diagnosis. It can open doors to care, understanding, accommodations, legal protections. It can also provide clarity and validation. But here's the catch. When the system is broken, people are going to seek answers wherever they can. And what I almost always find is that they've already done more research than most professionals ever get in their training, just to be certain they're not misdiagnosing themselves. One thing that surprises people, especially those new to exploring neurodivergence, is just how common imposter syndrome is, even within the neurodivergent community. You'd think that recognizing your traits would bring certainty, But what I often see in my practice is people saying things like, I relate to everything about autism, but maybe I'm just overthinking. I fit all the ADHD criteria, but what if I'm just lazy? What if I'm co-opting someone else's identity by calling myself neurodivergent? This imposter syndrome isn't a random occurrence. It's the byproduct of a lifetime of invalidation, especially for those of us who mask well, or who are high achieving, or who've adapted so much that others don't see the struggle, and when we share it with them, they are dismissive or minimizing. The fear of not being neurodivergent enough is real, and it's why so many people stay silent, afraid they'll be judged, dismissed, or told they're just chasing a trend. But here's the truth. You don't need to prove your pain as a neurodivergent to anyone. If you're struggling, if the neurodivergent framework resonates, if it brings clarity and relief, that matters. You don't need to tick every single box to be worthy of care or support. And here's the problem. When someone is told their traits don't count unless they fit a specific mold, or unless a professional says the magic words, it doesn't protect them. It isolates them. Because misdiagnosis isn't neutral. Being told you're just anxious or just depressed can mean being placed on medication that doesn't help, or worse, being denied the tools and accommodations that would. It can mean years, decades of internalized ableism, of believing you're broken, lazy, incompetent, or unlikable, of never having a framework to understand your needs, and never being able to ask for support. On the other hand, recognition, whether it comes from a meme, a therapist, a late-night Reddit scroll, can be life-altering. It can mean finally letting go of shame, finally understanding your limits, finally honoring your needs. So where do we go from here? Well, we need more trained neuro-affirming professionals who understand the broad, nuanced ways neurodivergence can present. We need diagnostic tools that reflect lived internal experience, not outdated checklists that focus only on external traits. We need to reduce financial barriers and long wait times. And we need to take people seriously when they say, this is what my brain feels like. In the meantime, we should not be shaming people for seeking self-understanding through the only avenues currently available to them. Social media is not a substitute for a formal diagnosis, but it is a starting point, a mirror, a map. And often, it's the only place someone has ever been allowed to see themselves clearly. It is the only resource they have at their disposal to validate their everyday reality. Here's something I want to name directly. As neurodivergence becomes more visible and better understood, we're also seeing more resistance. The more people start talking openly about ADHD and autism online, the more we hear pushback. Comments like, everyone thinks they're neurodivergent now. You're not disabled, you're just weird. Back in my day, we called that being lazy or shy. And this reaction is a form of backlash, a kind of identity threat. Because when people who've always been considered normal start seeing others receive accommodations, validation, or even just language for their struggles, they feel like something's being taken away from them. So instead of asking, what do these new conversations make possible? Some people go into gatekeeping mode. They call it a trend. They mock self-diagnosis. They dismiss neurodivergent voices, especially online ones, as faking it for attention. But here's the thing. If talking about autism or ADHD on the internet were truly fun, glamorous, or profitable, we'd all be influencers by now. The reality is, most people aren't sharing their neurodivergence for clout. They're doing it because they're tired of suffering in silence. They're looking for community, understanding, and survival. Visibility doesn't cause an epidemic. It reveals what was already there and what was being overlooked. So yes, more people are identifying as neurodivergent. That's not a problem. That's a correction. If you're someone who suspects you might be neurodivergent, but you've been dismissed, doubted, or denied care, Know this: your experience is valid. You're not imagining things. You're not too sensitive or too much. You're navigating a world that wasn't built with you in mind. Whether you have a formal diagnosis or you're still figuring things out, your self-awareness is powerful, and you deserve support, respect, and care, no matter what stage of the journey you're on. Keep learning, keep questioning, keep reaching for understanding. You're not alone. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing it with anyone you think might benefit from my content. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.